Hello everyone, welcome to the Museum of American Speed. We're here in Lincoln, Nebraska. It is the 2025 International Speedsters Reunion. It's a celebration of the Model T Ford, and one of our special guests today is somebody that's just one of my all-time heroes. We have Robert Williams, icon in the world of hot rods and in the world of art. He's here to kind of take it all in, see the museum for the first time, and kind of enjoy some of this Model T action that we have going on around here. And Bob, I can't tell you what an honor it is for me. I went to graduate school for art, but I'd consider myself a wannabe artist, and I'm just hoping that I have the mental compression ratio to be able to keep up with you in this interview. I'm just such a fan of your art and fan of what you've done in the history of cars and hot rods, and I don't even know where to start asking you questions except to just ask, what do you think of this place? It's the first time you're seeing the museum.
Well, to begin with, you've ruined any chance I had at humility. That's over. I had heard about the Speedway Motors Auto Museum for decades, and it was always described to me as, you've got to see this place. It's got all these old engines. There's like this place. It's got all these engines, the museum, it's got all these engines, and you've got to go see it. Generation after generation, it seems like. So here I am, and all the promo and advanced information I've had has fallen way short of what I've run into here. This is more than just a museum. This is a nation, if not national, archives of automotive history. And there doesn't seem like there is any deficiency of arcane information in here. It's, well, overwhelming wouldn't cover it. It is such a joy to come in here and then look every inch of this place. It's an observational delight. If you enjoy automobiles and machinery, not just, this isn't like a tractor museum. This is like a very thrilling, swashbuckling race car museum. And it seems like that all of this has been assimilated from all over the country. And I would suggest that anybody that likes hot rods or race cars, drag racing, any form of racing, they should come here and look this over. This is a wonderful, wonderful venue.
Well, that means a lot coming from you. As I said, you've been around this world for a long time, the world of hot rods and motorcycles and going fast. And you said in another interview, the world kind of belongs to the young, and doing art that relates to young people, and hot rods and racing kind of relates to young people. To me, that's just so fascinating. And three things I kind of want to touch on in this interview is your relationship with hot rods and hot rod history, some of the things you've done, and then kind of coalescing with that, the world of art, and then just what it all means, to American culture. Here we are in the Museum of American Speed, and here we celebrate freedom and what it means to be free and to be able to go out and build a fast car or go racing. And it seems like more and more there's more constriction on what we can do as Americans, and where do you see it all going? But first, kind of wanted to talk about your history, kind of how it all started. You weren't always in Los Angeles. You started out kind of in the south of the country in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and tell me about the early days.
I was born on Route 66, March the 2nd, 1943, in the St. Joseph Hospital, which was right on Route 66, 1943, see? Yeah. My father was in the Army Air Force, and he met my mother in Albuquerque, and I was created and born there. I was conceived right there, see. So my father was in the Army Air Force, and he and his family lived in the Deep South. So I spent a lot of my younger years back and forth from the deep south to Albuquerque and back, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, in that area. See, my father's history was enormously rich. That's a whole deal in itself. But the most poignant part that would interest you was my father had a very, very large drive-in restaurant in the late 40s, right after the Second World War, and he sponsored stock cars and eventually started buying and owning stock cars. So as a very young child, I was subject to half-mile dirt tracks and motorcycles and stock cars. See? So I was raised around all these bull arena racetracks. So I learned early on that there was such a thing. I was very fascinated with the stock cars, especially the cars in the early 30s, like the 32, 33, 34 Fords. And it was pointed out to me, well, these things are run on the street as hot rods. You know, a little kid, 10, 11. So by the age of 12, by the time I'm 12, I'd encouraged my father to buy me a 34 Ford, and he got me a 34 Ford 500 coupe.
Oh, that's a nice dad.
At 12 years old.
And they weren't always easy to find. I mean, those cars have always been kind of difficult.
There were always a demand for them.
Yeah.
They were a little easier to find in Southern California. The way I was told was that it took the Depression a year or so to get to California, a little later. So there was a little more money in California, and the weather was nice, and that's where you get your large accumulation of roadsters in Fayette. So anyway, I got this coupe. I was a little kid. I could drive it on back roads sometime, you know. My parents knew about it and whatnot. And prior to that, I was a consummate reader of Hot Rod magazine, and I really enthusiastic about Hot Rod. It was like the scriptures to me.
Yeah.
So I had no peer group to shoot ideas back and forth. It was just me and this influence and buying this car and reading Hot Rod magazine. All the other people that knew were young at 12 and 13, and 11 were basketball and football and whatnot, you know.
Which I hear you weren't awful at. You played some sports when you were
really young. Very little, and pathetic at best. So I was probably third string.
Yeah.
My father's restaurant, the Parkmore, sponsored a small football team, a junior football team, and I was on that. But nothing I want to reflect back on. I also went to military school as a very young kid, and that gave me a sense of enormous blind discipline. See? And then I come from good Christian stock, so I had work ethics. You know, I had an enormous work ethics. Even in my teenage years, I couldn't dent my work ethics. So, and where else should I go with this?
Yeah, so kind of talking about hot rods and how you got involved in that world. Your parents, when they saw you tearing around in the coupe, how did they feel about that?
Well, it was back roads and whatnot, or one of them would be with me or something.
Yeah.
Alabama, there's a lot of back roads in Alabama. You know? Sure. And my grandparents had a ranch and cattle and whatnot. And I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, but that ended after the final separation. Went to Albuquerque. Then I was kind of a feral kid on the streets. You know? Yeah. So moved to Albuquerque finally in '56. I came out to California one summer in '55. That was a revelation. That was like going to Jerusalem. Yeah. See, that was the promised land. Southern California in 1955 was utopia. Yeah. It was utopia. All the little towns hadn't completely grown together into one monster yet. And you could stand on just any boulevard, and you stand there for an hour, and you would see 3 hot rods. I guarantee you stand on any regular boulevard, and there'll be at least 3 hot rods go by.
And I'm guessing they had cruise nights, you know, so kids.
No, there wasn't cruise nights.
Oh, really?
No,
just regular traffic.
No, cruise nights is when it become like a desperate thing they had to band together. They
Makes sense,
no,
yeah.
well, there was no cruise
It
night.
wasn't like American Graffiti, in other words. Maybe until the 60s.
Listen, I don't know what people told you or what impression you got of the 50s. I wouldn't go through the 50s again at gunpoint. I don't want to go through the social shortcomings of the 50s. The associations with girls. The 50s were terrible. I did a lot of fighting in the 50s, and a lot of getting arrested in the 50s, and a lot of motorcycle accidents, a lot of problems, a lot of getting suspended and expelled in the 50s. There was nothing beautiful about the 50s.
I think in one interview you said you were hanging off the back of a motorcycle, lighting a match off the pavement, and it was crazy.
I knew people that would pay you money if you would tell them where there was someone like the Fonz, because they would hunt him down and just disintegrate him. You know, you could not walk around the street in the 50s and act cocky. Yeah. No, you couldn't. When you were a kid, you didn't wear a motorcycle jacket unless you had a motorcycle. Yeah. I remember, boy, I learned quick not to just be casual with a motorcycle jacket. We're getting way off the subject here.
I love it. This is the good stuff because, yeah, that's what I love so much about you and your art is there's an honesty to it. There's a truth, and the truth is cool because, you know, when you grow up watching movies about a certain era, you get a mental picture of what that was like, but then you hear from somebody that comes from an artistic perspective and a hot rod and racing perspective and telling you how it is. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to learn.
When you walk down the street, you look the block ahead because you might have to cross over. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You just go happily down because there might be some problems. You know, and I'm not talking in the bad neighborhoods. You know, there was a masculine air of finding a weaker person and disturbing them. I'm trying to be as tactful about this as possible. I could really color this thing up, but you're not going to be able to use it.
It was easy to get your ass kicked, in other words, if you didn't watch it.
Exactly. Exactly.
I love it.
So, anyway, I was so fascinated with hot rods. And when at 12, 13 years old, when I'd go downtown, it cost a dime to go downtown on the bus, and then another dime to go in the movies, and another dime for popcorn or maybe a drink or something. And then I got out of the movies early, and then I'd scout all the way around the edge of downtown where all the used car lots were, because the old V8 cars were put in the back. All the junk cars were put in the back of the used car lots. See? So when I would go riding around the country, I was looking in farmers' lots. Okay. Let me bring this up. I moved to New Mexico, and I got involved in motorcycles, Indian motorcycles. And I had a chief and some chief parts, but I had the later Indians, American Indians, and an English Royal Enfield Indian Hounds era scrambler. And I wasn't the right person with the temperament or this maturity for a motorcycle, nor were a lot of people, young people my age, that got killed on them. Because I did stunts and tricks on them, and I don't want to go into that. But you know, my group of friends on the motorcycles had one set of crutches, and that set of crutches was always in use.
I love it.
I remember going down to court in the snow on crutches, taking buses all the way downtown in the snow to go to court to apologize for my problems. So motorcycles are not working for me.
To get to the four-wheel variety and get out of
And I loved hot rods. So I got a 27T, front half of a 27T touring car, and I found a 27 turtle deck, and I grafted them together, but skillfully, not just, they don't look good just pushed together. You got to make the back of the touring car look like the Roadster, see?
Sure, yeah.
So I took 18 inches out of the turtle deck, so it had the body just jumps into this little cute turtle deck. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? Just cute as hell.
Yep.
And I put it on a Model A frame. It was dumped down with tube axle, had a tube axle in it, and then Johnny Caples, the famous race driver, welded me a suicide plate on it. I had an Olds engine in it, had a quick change rear end. The body was channeled, the thing's already pointed down, and the engine's pointed up, see, like that.
Yep. The way an artist would do it.
The body was channeled 9 inches at the cowl and stock at the back. So the body was dumped down on the frame like it's bent in half with this cute little Roadster body. And when you look at it from the back with that thing, that little tail holding itself up with that quick change, it was the cutest little hot rod you ever saw, you know. And then I had a stock windshield. But I spent an awful lot of time on that Roadster. I had a few other hot rods too, but this was my dream girl. You know, it was the cutest thing you ever saw. But then I was a truck driver, a forklift operator. I worked for a carnival. I did a lot of worked on Adobe houses. I had all kinds of jobs, but I didn't have a lot of money. Nobody had a lot of money. In the 50s, nobody had a lot of money. Right. I would say a third of the early hot rods were like stolen parts. I would go that far to say a third of the parts. Yeah. So anyway, I had stuff chromed. It was just sucking what little money I had. And I had a blonde fiancée girlfriend. It was way out of my class. Way out of my class.
Times were good.
And I'm not going into any details, but it didn't take her long to realize she was with the wrong guy. So, you know, she left me, and the other girls didn't make me happy. So I decided, well, I got away from the motorcycles. That was good. Get away from the hot rods, because my vocation, the choice of my vocation, was stupid to begin with. Being an artist, that's stupid. That's poetically nice, cultivated, but when it comes to a no-nonsense occupation, that's kind of ridiculous to be an artist. You think if you get into art, the functionaries of a gallery or a museum, and that's what most people that take art classes, they ended up some kind of functionary or something. But to actually think you're going to be an artist, see. Okay, I said, well, forget the hot rods. I'm going to become a gentleman, see. Educate myself. So I had a certain proficiency at draftsmanship. And I studied and studied, read books. And I went to Los Angeles, what little money I could get. I went to Los Angeles. And I had nice clothes and went to Los Angeles City College. The young gentleman was versed on art, and I could carry on an intelligent art conversation, always receptive to learn more about art. So my influences prior to going to art school were comic books, B-movies, pulp magazines, a number of questionable things, that the things that I enjoyed, especially comic books. So I went to art school thinking that I could take this beautiful vision of mine and apply it to the art world.
Sure.
because it was fresh and wonderful, and I was stimulated.
You're a great draftsman, and they should respect that, right?
Well, I get to art school, and I was in for a little surprise. That the entire curricula for the last 25 years has been abstract expressionism, and any indication of stopping and spending too much time on something was a sign of a dullard.
Right.
You know?
Yep. I felt that pain.
If you didn't express your feelings, you know, and have a sense of fast color, you know, and a sense of movement, you know, if you just noodled on something, maybe you should be an illustrator.
Right.
And if you had any tendency to narrate, you damn sure better be an illustrator, see.
I remember one of my professors saying that they were standing in front of a Rothko painting, and it was a religious experience, and it drove them to tears. I went home that day distraught, knowing that I was in the same boat as you. I loved to illustrate. I loved realism. And I turned on the TV. TLC Rides was the episode. And you came on. They were talking about rat rods, and you came on the show, and you said, I was the first one to predicate a car with a primered paint job was finished. And I thought, gosh, a real artist.
Yeah, well, that's very kind
but
of
you. That's a different subject.
No,
but
well,
I felt your
I
pain.
think we could go that way right now, I think, unless you want to.
Sure.
So, and one of the wonderful benefits that I had in going to Los Angeles and City College was I met my wife, Suzanne, who was extremely talented in many respects, far beyond me. Her dexterity and design sense exceeded mine. So we just assimilated together like milk and chocolate or something, you know, we just immediately formed up. And I know that she had some problems with school with a very loose curricula. She later went on to, we both went to Chenard Art School for a little while, and then she later went to Art Center and took transportation, where she could really develop a sense she had in automotive design and industrial design and stuff. It was more her forte. She was still very much a painter today. But anyway, despite of everything, I got all A's in my classes. I was nominated for the Dean's List at Los Angeles City College. I was the editorial cartoonist. And I won second place nationally in cartooning for junior colleges. See. So then we went to Chenard's for a little while, and then I had to, like, life came to a realistic point where I had to get jobs. Then I got a job as art director for Black Belt magazine. Then after a while they let me go, and I got a job as a container designer for Weyerhaeuser Corporation. This was during my psychedelic period, so there was a clash there.
Had plenty of stuff going on.
So they let me go there, and then I looked for other work, and then I went to the unemployment agency. I had met Ed Roth in 1960 at a car show, and I went down to the unemployment agency, and they didn't have anything for me. Then they said, well, we got this job nobody would take, and I asked, what is it? And they said, well, they're looking for an art director down at this guy named Ed Big Daddy Roth, but nobody would take the job, see. So I said, give me the phone. And then I went down there to talk to Ed, and he looked at my portfolio, and he says, you know, if I knew you existed, I'd have hunted you up. So our life just did a 180, you know, freedom and money, and we could dress the way we wanted, and I just had to meet deadlines. And I had an opportunity to really open the birdcage on my rapacious imagination. see. Before it had been inhibited, but I could really exercise it with Roth.
You know, when people like Dan Woods talk about, you know, you'd get the paycheck and Roth would draw little flies pooping on your name. I mean, how much of his style was your style rubbing off on him? Because when I look at Rat Fink, I see one of your paintings. I mean,
well, that school of thought is what you see. That school of thought. That actually comes from Mad Comics, not Mad Magazine, Mad Comics that preceded it, and a fellow named Basil Wolverton. You ever heard of Basil Wolverton? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's good. Basil Wolverton was one of the first guys that did really crazy, freaky looking stuff, you know, back in the late 40s and early 50s. He was the genesis of really crazy stuff. Remember, I'm still not interested in getting into hot rods. Well, I'm sitting next to Jim Jacobs every day.
Oh, yeah, Jim.
Okay. He's working there too, and Suzanne's working. And all I do is hear about this guy got this body and that guy sold that 34 coupe. All day I hear about these things going back and forth. So I started to give in. I said, hey Jake, you know, if you ever find me a 32 Roadster body, you know, I'm not looking for a coupe with the top sawed off, and I'm not looking for a cabriolet, but would you let me know about it? Every morning when he come in, I said, hey Jake, I'm looking for a 32 Ford Roadster body, and not a coupe with the top sawed off, and not a cabriolet. This for months. It was like my way of saying good morning. One morning he comes in and he says, get your paycheck. I found a Roadster in Seal Beach. $200.
$200.
A beautiful Roadster. So we go down there and got it, and now I'm back in it. See, I'm deep in it.
It was probably always in the blood, just
oh yeah, it's like I get around motorcycles and it comes back. Yeah. You know, I say, man, I could have fun on that thing. Yeah, riding a motorcycle or a Roadster, riding on a Roadster on a nice evening, moonlight evening, and a lone road, man, there's nothing beats that.
And no new car gives you that.
No, and you hit that throttle and that sucker jumps, and you can watch those wheels, you know. And
there's always a fear of death, you know.
Oh, that's right. That's
what makes it great.
Yeah. Are you getting on the freeway at 95 and you get up against that K rail and you hear the echo of every nut and bolt that squeaks in your car. Have you ever been in a Roadster high on the freeway?
I built my own Roadster after I watched that TLC episode, by the way. I built my own Roadster on 32 rails, and I always think I'm that guy in your painting hot rod race in the 34, you know, that leads that image. I always think I'm that guy.
Yeah, well, it's amazing how you can get a car that doesn't have a top and it's open wheeled, and you get it up against that steel K-rail, not K-rail, what do you call it, rail, and it just, every little squeak you never noticed before is echoed back to you, you know. But anyway.
So you're the bug bit again. You've got this Roadster, and what was the first step with that? Was it kind of a basket case?
I was in an apartment, so I had to store it at a brother-in-law's for a while I accumulated parts for it at the different swap meets. So later on, Jake introduced me to this fellow named Pete Eastwood. And we're over at Movie World. There's a little swap meet over at Movie World, and Jake says, you should meet this guy. He knows everything about cars. You'd be surprised. You know, a little short blonde-haired guy, you know, a cute little blonde-haired guy. And he had a 32 Ford deck lid handle. He's trying to sell it. And he says, I'll sell this to you for 15. I said, I'll give you 10. He said, no, 15. I thought, well, the arrogant little bastard. Well, that was Pete Eastwood. The next one, I bought one about $75, and then another one for $150. See? But Pete Eastwood was one of these rare people that had one foot in the antique car world deeply, because his father and uncle started the Horseless Carriage Club, and then his other foot, because he worked for Blair Speed Shop. And this little guy knew everything. And anyway, he lived quite a bravado life, being unfortunately born rather attractive. Ladies liked him quite a bit. But he'd go out, he had a 32 Ford 3-winner coupe that he built at 17, and the chassis was really an interesting chassis. This was early on with coil spring rear end and all kind of torsion bars and stuff. But what he'd do was he'd get to drinking and he'd go out on Friday and Saturday, have a horrible wreck, and then Monday and Tuesday put it back together, habitually. So he got rid of this car and parted it out, and I got the rolling chassis. So we spent a couple of days trying to straighten all his problems. And that's the frame that's under my Roadster.
Really? And that's why it gives credit to him on the side of the side rail.
Yeah,
Love
his
it.
very first chassis.
That's cool. That is cool.
So anyway, then I had I thought, well, I built a number of hot rods, and I never got them finished, and I had dreams with them. And my problem was, I tried to get them finished. What if I don't finish it? And just primer it and just drive it like that. And I'll tell you, it sounds common now, but people were real upset about it. They say, well, how are you going to do it? I go, do it, it's done. Well, what do you mean? That's like finding out you're a child molester or something. Your association with that child's not normal. It's like, what do you mean not paint it?
What year would that been about? Early 80s maybe?
It was in the 80s.
Yeah.
And I had these funky fenders that were terrible, and they had big splits in them. And then I had bars straps underneath with screws going on to hold the cracks. So you could see all the cracks had screws holding them together. This thing was funky, man. Yeah. So anyway, I just said, well, this is finished, pal. And I run around with enough esteemed hot rodders that it wasn't that easy to criticize my judgment on this. I work for Roth, and I run around with all these guys, and they really understood what I was doing. The previous name for those kind of cars were beaters, but you just got rid of them. Yeah. But this was, now the name Rat Rod came from Grave Baskerville. He named it, see. So I don't get that credit. But I was the progenitor of it, see. Yeah. Now, you'll be hard-pressed to find anyone that would admit to that now. They don't know about me. But anyway, I'd drive it downtown, leave it overnight, and come back. People throw garbage in it, It was a very comfortable car to drive,
For sure, you didn't have to worry about it.
No, you didn't have to worry about it. And it was just a wonderful thing.
As an artist, you got enough on your mind. You don't need to worry about
but
the paint job that you get
But then as it started building, and there's going to be more rat rods and more rat rods, and when I was with my dad back in the early 50s with stock cars, I'd see all these race car paint jobs. And out here is a testimony that a race car paint job has a bravado to it and a dash that a passenger car does not have.
Right.
Like a race car is meant to be seen in action.
It's your suit of armor, but it's also the big flag you wave when you get to the race.
That's right. So I thought, well, man, I want a redneck race car paint job on this Roadster. And there were lots of Roadster drag cars that had numbers on them and stuff. So I thought, well, I'm going to paint this thing very nicely, get the body work done really nice, but put this bold geometry on it that violates the lines of the car. Yeah. Because you have to realize when those early paint jobs were putted on those cars, they didn't give a damn about the car body. This car had about a 3-year life expectancy before it was over. Right. Then you get the next one, see? So I wanted to have that passive look to it, And people look at it and go, this guy, his design sense is a little off,
He ruined the reveal in the frame rail.
The integrity of the beauty is not there. So I painted that big piece of melted cheese shape over it that I'd seen on old race cars, and put the numbers and, the decals and stuff on it. And it just, when the fenders were off the car and the windshield's off, sitting in the garage, he'll look like a contender.
Oh, yeah.
It's like,
for sure.
Mine's next to the line. Mine's not going up to the line. But
And in the end, it's one of the most influential hot rods in America. Was it Hot Rod Magazine that said that?
That's your opinion. I appreciate that. There's still people just don't like that. You know, they don't like that. They don't see a virtue in that. You know?
Right.
But you know, I did that for me. Now I got to go back to an important point. When I was working with Roth, and I asked for this Roadster body, hot rodding was flat dying. You get a Hot Rod magazine in 1963, and you look at Hot Rod magazine now, which used to be my Bible 20 years early. On the cover is some new car part you don't know about. The majority of the pages are in there are advertising, and the articles that are in the magazine are about the advertising. See? So what happened to my world? See? That world was gone after 63. So anything after that is a world that's kind of looked back and created itself. Right. See? So that's when Rod and Customs concentrated on hot rods, and then the better hot rod magazines come. It become like a generic trend to an arcane world. See?
Sure.
So what we're in now is like an arcane world. See? Yeah. Like the kid down the street ain't gonna get a Deuce Roadster. Sorry, kid. You know.
Those
all got chewed up a long time ago.
Well, and that begs the question, you know, where's it all going? You know, I mean, this world of hot rods, and you know, hot rods have always been about getting what's available and cheap because people didn't have money. And
you know, I don't socially synchronize with a lot of automobile people. To me, a Nomad will always be a station wagon. See, it's a nice looking station wagon, but it'll always be a goddamn station wagon.
That's what you put the
groceries
in.
You didn't go pick a girl up in a station wagon. You know,
might have towed a dragster to the drag strip, maybe.
But, well, I understand people's appreciation for them. They're very, very attractive station wagons, but they're station wagon. You know, so. I had realized that the world I lived in, I was in a car club called the Rickshaws back in Albuquerque, and rickshaws still exist. And it's a good, wonderful club. It's probably got all modern muscle cars. I'm still a member, I guess. They give me their jacket. But when I was in it, it was a hard drinking, no nonsense, no bullshit hot rod club, you know. I mean, it was serious. They were making modified race cars and dragsters, top fuel dragsters, and a lot of bitchin' street cars in there, you know. Yeah. But about every 4 or 5 months, a highway patrol come there and check engine numbers, you know. And it wasn't like some innocent thing, you know. Right. But I hear now that they go to meetings and you can't drink at the meetings, and you know. It's a changed situation.
The culture's moved past.
Yeah. So anyway, I come from that group, and so I figured my world was, you know, I'm in a new world here of this arcane group of people looking back on the past and appreciating things. Okay. Now, my art senses, of course, have been deviated. They were corrupted by lowbrow culture, and I was trying to pass myself off pretentiously as a member of the art world, and it wasn't working. But as I was doing at City College, and I continued to do, I painted in the evenings on the weekends, wild detail paintings. Looking for an audience that obviously I'm going to have to create. There is no audience for this. No gallery will take it. No publication would review it. You know, other art friends laughed at it. But it, after a while, rather wealthy people bought these paintings. So that left me standing kind of alone. One
of my favorite art professors always said that there are gods that watch out and help artists at times. You know, you'll have this moment where you don't know where your next meal's coming from, and then all of a sudden something will happen, and then you're back in the green again, and you can afford to eat, and you can do painting. Were there times like that for you where you just thought, golly, I got to bail out of this, and then something happened?
No, the way I looked at it was that the art schools are pumping out so many artists with the same attitude to a finished product that there's legions of them, and there's obviously only like 5 or 8% are actually going to make it, and the rest of them just slag. You're not going to make it.
Right.
So what was sad was in my benefit, see? The harder art worked for me,
Right.
see?
Makes sense.
I mean, I'm sympathetic for these people. I've taught art, tried to work with young people, but they're coming in legions. You could look over the hill and here they're coming. The artists are coming. You know, and the art schools are pumping them out. And they're doing abstract expressionism because it's the easiest thing to teach them as quick as you can, see? They can't handle oil paints, so they give them acrylics, see? Then they're just, there is no such thing as bad art.
Right.
There's art that really doesn't entertain you. If it would be deemed bad art, that would be a bad observation subjectively. See, real art enters a world of objectivity. I mean, of subjectivity. The world we function in is objectivity.
Right.
See, when you claim you're an artist, you're handing in your cards, your license on objectivity, and you're getting one on subjectivity because we're in a world of bullshit. You know, you're saying, I'm an artist. You know? What do you do? I'm an artist.
I paint houses? No, I paint pictures.
So, anyway, where were we going with this?
Well, I think just thinking about your art is it's so fascinating because your production is amazing. I mean, there had to have been times, that you were just cranking out the paintings and your mind's going 1,000 miles an hour.
Okay, well, I'm back on my own track again. So I'm working for Ed, and I met Stanley Mouse. You know who Mouse is? That's Ed Roth's competitor earlier. He painted shirts at the shows. Well, he wandered off in the 1960s in San Francisco and become one of the great 5 of the psychedelic poster artists, see? And got extremely famous. Well, he would come in and say hi to Roth every once in a while. And he'd come in and say, I want to see what this new artist Williams is doing, We got to be good friends. Another artist was a fellow named Rick Griffin. So that's 2 of the psychedelic artists, see, of the big 5. Okay, now there's a cultural situation happening in the country. It's like the country's going to revolt, like the Vietnam War and the social cultures are, I don't know how to describe the horrible tensions. And I don't want to go into it, but anyway, after the psychedelic posters got going, the next obvious step was underground comic books, see? Now, the psychedelic posters were a form of commercial art because they pandered to the rock bands. But the comic books floated on their own weight, see? Sure. Okay. Now, there's a virtue on this thing. There's a backstory. A lot of backstories I'm not going to give you. There's a backstory on the comics. In 1963, in that era, there was a lot of comic books in the United States. And most of them were puerile children's comics. But there were starting to be a couple of publishing companies that were doing like some really, really good comic books. And there was a group called Entertainment Comics, EC Comics, Entertainment Comics. And they had the best artists that could be found, the best draftsmen, and the best writers. Ray Bradbury and people like this would write for them, the best writers. And they had a horror comics, science fiction comics, cowboy comics, combat comics, and they come out with this one at the very end, a kind of a goofy comic that had an abstract nature called Mad Comics. See, now Mad later turned into a magazine. I'll tell you that. Okay, well, this was like developing in the United States. Well, there was this guy named Dr. Frederick Wortham. He wrote a book called Seduction of the Innocent. Bestseller. It's about how comic books and movies are just destroying our children, making them juvenile delinquents. So then there's a Kefauver committee, see, on comic books. So they just cut the good comics, they're gone. I'm a little kid reading my good comics, I get to the dime store, or I get them at the drugstore, and all of a sudden there is no more. And I don't know about the news and the Kefauver thing, there's just no more good comics. But later I find out. See. Okay, my generation finds out about this. And they create underground comics. There is nothing that is sacred in underground comics. Nothing.
No holds barred.
Ethically, sexually, morally, theologically, there's nothing that's sacred in these things.
And you gotta love that honesty, right?
It started by a guy named Robert Crumb, see?
Yeah.
And the flagship, the one that started it all, was Zap Comics, see? And two of the artists in Zap Comics was Rick Griffin and Victor Moscoso. They were both psychedelic poster artists, and I knew Rick Griffin. And one of the guys, Gilbert Shelton, did automotive magazines for Pete Millar. See, are you familiar with that? Gilbert Shelton and Pete Millar.
Yep, worked for Iske and did a lot of
Yes.
Stuff. Yep.
Well, Gilbert Shelton did Wonder Warthog for Pete Millar, and he was in Zap Comics. So I write to the publishing companies to get a poster made and say, is there any pages for Zap for me? And Gilbert Shelton says, yeah, I know Robert Williams, we want him in Zap. So I got into Zap, see? So there's 7 artists. We don't know in it. We own it. It's equally owned. The top underground comic, and some of those comics sold over 1 million issues. See, so this thing intellectually just flourished. Time magazine said, "Keep your eye on these Zap artists. Watch out for them in the future." See. Playboy, everybody did articles on them. Anyway, now I'm working for Roth. I take all the Zap artists down and introduce them to Roth. And, that was a world to watch those two worlds collide. That was because they were brothers, and they were brothers. So anyway,
Kind of a side note to that, did you have guys, do you remember when Daryl Mayab worked for Roth? Do you have some straight-laced guys that, that were more illustrator artists that?
Well, no, Ed had many people work for him. Yeah. I took over Ed Newton's job. Are you familiar with Ed Newton?
Yep.
Ed Newton is one of the most brilliant car designers. He should have a whole spread in here.
Right.
Seriously.
No, I agree.
But Ed Newton made Roth nervous, so Newt did freelance work for him, and I took over Newt's job. So I'm working for Roth in the day. I'm going home and doing Zap Comics and trying to do oil paintings. See, okay. Ed Roth goes out of business. The whole Roth story, that's another interview. That's too colorful. So Roth goes out of business. So I've got enough momentum selling paintings and working for Zap Comics, and the Zap Comics give me national notoriety. See, so I just started doing paintings. Okay, I want to get back into the car thing for you. I'll try to make this as fast as possible about the art thing. We'll go back to the car. I'll sell paintings right along. But they weren't going through galleries, and there were no reviews on them. But then divine providence came my way in the form of punk rock. The late 70s and early 80s, this music phenomenon started of punk rock. And it was an antisocial, nihilist, semi-criminal, bohemian world. See?
Dominated by the young,
the
right?
punk, the so-called flower children had faded, and the younger generation after that had that zeitgeist in a much more aggressive manner. So they had their own rock bands, which were noise factories. And then the kid would go out on the weekend, couples go out on the weekend, and then after they've indulged in drugs and booze and whatever they're going to get into, then the concert would be over that night at the club. Then they would go to an after-hours club, say 1 o'clock, and that would be an art gallery that was a front for selling alcohol without a license. And there was these punk rock galleries. This was in New York and Los Angeles. I caught onto it right away. I realized with my bohemian soul, this was my new home. This was like a hermit crab that went to another shell. The art could be any kind of art, but it had to be done energetically and tasteless. See? Had to have energy, glitter, and anything you want, but it had to be obviously tasteless and explosive. So that's right up my alley. So I said, perfect formula, sex and violence. And I could draw. So I did a series of paintings called Zombie Mystery Paintings. They were an enormous sensation. Just sold instantly. And so I just started turning these things out. Okay, here's my way into the door. Every time I do a series of zombie mystery paintings, I tighten them up a little bit, and often in the corner, I do kind of like a little suggested background of 3 dimensions, see? And as it progressed, that little background would get bigger and bigger. And it'd have slashes and spilt paint on it and everything, with just a little more depth of visual interest in the picture. Till I had full paintings that were crazy as hell with depth to them, you know? Sure. Lowbrow art. So before I'd done this, I'd gotten, Gilbert Shelton published a book with me called Lowbrow Art of Robert Williams in my earlier paintings. And it went into the virtues of very low-class art as being, it's the virtue of stripping away sophistication, of how remarkable a piece of artwork would be if you just take sophistication out of it. Like Picasso said, the biggest enemy of imagination is sophistication, see. So I got rid of sophistication. So these things were just selling like crazy. And then I was showing in New York too and other places with these wild goddamn paintings. And getting an enormous amount of success. A lot of success in New York, you know. But I keep doing a little tighter, a little more time. Prices go up and up and up and up. Till I finally got to where I have got an art school created. I mean, a lot of people followed me on this, see. I have created an entire art school in the United States of this wild goddamn art that's 3-dimensional in the face of the academic art world. So I think, you know, I worked my way up. Okay, part of this way up, some intelligent people from the southern Bay areas, like Huntington Beach and that area in there, were interested in me. We decided we'll try to do a magazine. We tried a magazine in New York, and that didn't work out. And then we tried to do our own magazine called Juxtapoz. I named it. Me and Suzanne was very much a part of this, and a couple other people, see. So it was suggested, since I'd been on the cover of Thrasher magazine a couple of times, maybe we go up and talk to the head of High Speed Productions in San Francisco, the publisher, and they were very interested in doing a magazine. So I submitted a list, 125 names, and they took 20 of the names, took them to a lawyer and made sure that they weren't used or clean, and they picked Juxtapoz. So I come up with the name Juxtapoz. So me and Suzanne worked on the format, and you know, and so we got all the hot rod artists in there, and Von Dutch, and you know, a lot of hot rod stuff in there, a lot of biker stuff, tattoo stuff, and pictures of the artists themselves. Anyway, that magazine is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, when you print a magazine, I've been in the magazine business quite a while. If you print 10,000 magazines and you sell 25% of the magazines and the rest are returns, that's about average. Juxtapoz had like a 45% sell-through. See, that was just unheard of. Right. This shitty little thing right out of the chute was in the black. Okay. So the first print run was 23,000, and it was quarterly. Then it went to monthly, then bi-month, then bi-weekly or weekly, or monthly. I mean. And it started, in the beginning, no schools would let it in their classes. It was just garbage. Right. You can't have it, no, this is one of those, you can't bring this in. In 3 years, they're in the Bible of all the classes. Okay, the first achievement was we outsold Art in America. Then a year later, we outsold Art Forum. Okay. Then after about 2 years after that, we outsold Art News. Art News is the biggest art magazine in the world.
That's the one that shoved down your throat in art school, by the way.
Yeah. So anyway, it outsold Art News.
Do you think the art news people subscribe to Juxtapoz just to see what the competition
No,
was doing?
it changed the formats, especially in Art in America. Juxtapoz started changing a lot of stuff.
Less words, more
Juxtapoz magazine changed Art in America, period. It's a culture we live in today. I made my living as a painter, not the magazine business. So, you know, I can't be in San Francisco all the time. So it got its own life and its own direction after a while, and it was making money, so.
How many years before you decoupled from it?
About 4 or 5. Yeah. And anything that gets big starts softening and get trite to grab the largest audience it can. So, you know, I'm kind of a rough-hewn character, you know, and you know, I like the rivets inside of the battleship, you know, and that wasn't working after a while, you know, and it started getting more tender with big-eyed children and bullshit like that, you know. So it you know, it had its own life, you know, and it went its own way. But you know, if I decided not to paint, I went up and got an office up there and made a demand to. I went from gallery to gallery with paintings. You know, I went better gallery to better gallery, and got some good galleries in New York, and then I'd been in some real important art shows. You know, I was in the most important art show in Los Angeles history, which was the Helter Skelter show, which I was the biggest problem. I was the biggest problem there.
That's a good thing.
They said that I brought more than half the people there, and they'll never show me again. They refused to have my artwork in the permanent collection. But they readily admit, I was the champion of the biggest show they ever had there.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
It was written up in over 150 newspapers in the United States, and I was the nadir of the show. It said nadir, except the Washington Post, and it said it was a wonderful feeling to walk into an art show and it felt like walking into a Zap comic.
Oh, how cool is that?
Now the important thing about the Helter Skelter show, it was the first major art show in the history of shows that 60% of the material in there, maybe more, was all cartoon related. In some way, were cartoon related, see. Not just pop art, but cartoon related, see. And they didn't notice that. They hadn't noticed that there was this horrible change that happened to them right under their nose. Okay, let's go back to cars, I guess. So.
Well, one question I had too before we do that is, your sculptures are kick-ass. Tell me a little bit about, as a sculptor, how sculpture kind of came into being, because mostly doing paintings, and then some of your sculpture is monumental. Some of the stuff at Galpin I've seen is just awesome.
Well, if you're a realistic painting, you think in model forms. So I can do a painting and I can see the back of the painting and you can't, Well, your mind wants to work that,
Sure.
And the bad thing about sculpture, it has no environment. But the good thing about sculpture, it has form. But both three-dimensional and two-dimensional art has suggestions of speed, and which is the fourth dimension. See, you can use the fourth dimension. So there's an itching always. And in college, I did a lot of sculpture, straight A's. So I realized it's one thing to be a painter and be able to afford that, but when you go into sculpturing, you need a financial backer. It's not just you make a little thing, see. You do a big thing, you're going to need some help, see. Yeah. So I did a bunch of drawings, and I thought, well, I can just sell these drawings alone of ideas for sculptures showing three different directions of one object, and like really crazy stuff, like imagine that 10 feet tall, whoa, So I had a bunch of these, and I took them to a couple of fabricators, and they said, no. They all said, well, go over to Gentle Giant. And I'm not going to do that. These weren't, I don't fuck with this anymore. So a friend of mine says, well, go over to Gentle Giant. I said, no. And he says, I'm taking you to Gentle Giant. So I go over there, and they look at the stuff. The owner of Gentle Giant, a big fabrication house, he looks at it, those drawings, he says, I'll underwrite one of these. And the guy that brought me, pretty wealthy, he says, I'll underwrite the other. So I had two big sculptures for free, see. Now, I did the sculptures, see. I'm one of the very few artists that go to a fabrication house that do the sculptures, see. I'm at every step, and I'm there carving and sawing and putting back together and whatnot.
Because you built hot rods, you know how all that stuff works.
Well, hot rodding had a lot to do with assimilating this thing. So here's how they were done. You had a drawing of three different directions. You give it to a guy with a computer. He gets it on the screen, and you look at it, and it'll turn around, and it's just got a lot of problems, and you tell him, fix the problem. You tell him, no, make the leg here and there. They fix that. Okay. You okay that, then you make a little maquette. Then that's got a lot of problems. Then you got to have the maquette corrected. And after you think you get the maquette just as perfect, then they can come in with big blocks of foam. They put it in a room, and for weeks the CNC machine pecks at it, see? And after this thing's crudely knocked out, you realize, oh man, this thing's screwed up. So you got to get in there with a saw and glue and cut the arms and stuff off and rework it and do it right, see? Okay. One of these sculptures has got the surface volumes of maybe 3 or 4 Corvettes, see? So you got to have help. Yeah. So I sculpted it to I can get it fairly well, and then me and a crew body shop it perfectly, see? Absolutely perfect. Then we send it to a fiberglass fabricator. He gets my beautiful work and he saws it in little sections for female molds. So that way they can make additions, because almost all these went into additions. Yeah. So then after the fiberglasses work, then we got to put in a very intricate and strong steel armature all the way through it. And that's really the talent to make this thing functional, is this underworking. Like that diamond in the goat's ass, those 5 fingers are 5 pieces of rebar up there on a steel plate, and you can hang on that, see. But
The processes, it can take you out of that creative world that you like to live in so much because the process is so intense.
I had Tony Shafrazi Gallery, the guy in New York, that would show these things, or I'd have been in trouble. See, in New York, there's a paper come out. It's called New York Magazine, not New Yorker, New York Magazine. On the back cover, they start at the bottom of the worst thing in that week and go to the best thing that happened in New York, in Manhattan that week, and it come up to the top was my downer in the goat's ass. For that week in New York.
All right.
So, anyway, it was a successful and fun thing, but the responsibility and the money, the movement, it's gotten way beyond me being the painter, you know. And I could see other people pursuing this till they either got big or they went in the hole, or most of them went in the hole. You know. There was a couple of fabrication houses in Los Angeles. They're in Germany and all over. But they're big hangars. And there'll be like 10, 12 artists in stalls having work done. It costs them a fortune to have crews. The artist don't do nothing. He just points or brings in photos. He don't touch the stuff, you know. And I'd watch these things go together in this whole world. It's all pop art, absolutely all pop art. It's like me getting a cup, going in there and say, well, I've got an underwriter, would you make this cup 18 feet tall? You know, and that was the, you know, that was the worth of it. But
and you can't really hire students for that. You know, a lot of these artists, you know, they have a studio and they have, you know, multiple assistants, and for that kind of work, it's just, it's difficult.
Well, Shafrazi wanted to drag me into that big world, and Shafrazi is continually trying to straighten me into a commercial world of millionaires. Yeah. See, and I like this crazy shit. You know, I like to exercise the imagination. I have no interest in interior decorating, none.
No kitsch for you.
And that's the direction that the New York art world wants to take you in. See. So I was with him 27 years and did very, very well. He got me into Whitney and got me some really important deals, you know, but that just wasn't my cup of tea, you know. I got to the point where I could no longer deal with galleries. I had to start dealing directly with museums, see. And so the last 15 or 20 years, I've just been dealing with museums and not worrying about it, so.
Your latest book is excellent. I mean, it is
that
just
big book?
Oh gosh, it's fantastic. And what I found with that book is, you know, I can sit down with it for hours at end, multiple days. You know, you look at this art and it's so deep. There's so much thought going into every one of these images. And what I find is, I was talking to Suzanne about this. You know, it seems like about 50% of the people that look at that book, it just blows their mind. And then the other 50%, it's like, there's too much truth, I gotta keep moving. Yeah. Like they're almost scared of it, right?
It's a lurid book, it's lurid. Pardon me, if you look in the back, there's a treatise on every painting.
Love it.
A very, very important part, if not the majority of the influence, is the hot rod culture in this thing. Yeah. I mean, you can just look at this thing and you realize, well, there's a problematic situation here, and it dawns back into Von Dutch and Roth and these guys, you know. Right. Zap Comics and this demi-world, this questionable demi-world that we don't want the kids to see, you know. That was the genesis of this.
Sure.
When we were doing Zap Comics, and I had an understanding that this was like Top Fuel dragster imagination. Yeah. When I realized I could do anything I could think of, and we all started working, our libidos come to the surface. And the whole underground movement, it was estimated that about 400 news dealers went to jail over those comics. There was like Supreme Court decisions and everything made over those comics. So I always realized anything I do, there's going to be some ramification in there that might hurt some people. You know, there's a big, beautiful 5-volume set of Zap comics. I donated one to the LA County Art Museum. And the dedication in there to who it was to all the poor bastards who got arrested for selling Zap comics. Okay, when I was working at Roth Studios, I worked at Roth Studios from 65 to 70. The atmosphere of working at Roth Studios was like a psychedelic think tank, because the most important item to come out of there was imagination. So you could strain your imagination as much as you wanted, and then we'd pick up the scraps and see what was usable. See? So I'd sit there and do ridiculous sketches and whatnot, and then Ed would go through them and go, no, change this, change that, or one thing or another. But there was a continual flow of people coming in there that come from all over the United States, I guess much like here. So you had these very inquisitive looky-loos that come there to see the sacred home of Ratfink and Big Daddy Roth. And the place wasn't clean, and it wasn't all that very well organized. But the work ethic there was, everyone that worked there knew there was nothing like this on the planet, so you'd better do your job as best you can, because there is no other place like this. And when Ed would go out of town, he would leave one girl in charge of bookkeeping. He'd be out of town for a month at car show, and the place would run itself as if Ed was there. You know, there was everyone realized we had a responsibility and whatnot. But it was Grand Central Station for every phylum of human being and condition that liked wheels, from the intellectual end of Tom Wolfe to the lowest echelons of the Hells Angels trying to rob the place. And there was a continual flow. We were not risque, but we were very boyish about our language. Ed always said, do not use the foul language in front of the girls. He would not tolerate that. But when the girls were out of sight, there was any vocabulary, anything you couldn't express more garbage. And that was really a lot of fun. And Friday nights he would every once in a while have stag movies, and we'd all, you know, it was wild. I don't want to say bohemian, but it was like a clubhouse of friends and strangers and wild people coming in there. And they came in spontaneously. Now, every year come Christmas, just before, the last day before Christmas, the place was open, without Ed's direction, the whole herd of these people would get together spontaneously. And it kind of made Christmas wonderful, because you were coming out of this plasma of insanity of people that hung out and did titty bars and, you know, bikers and hot rodders and, you know, very, very free and happy people, you know. I don't want to go into each incident of who came there and what kind of people came there, because they're too colorful for you. But years after Roth closed, the people that worked there kept in touch with each other, see? So me and Suzanne talked to some people, says, well, why don't we have like a big party like we did on Christmas every year? This is 77. And so we contacted all the people that worked there. And we talked to Ed. And Ed had been born again, so Ed didn't want any part of it, see? But we're all going to have a barbecue. And Jim Brucker at his museum said, well, you can have the back room over here and have a barbecue and whatnot. So we got a Datsun pickup bed and made a barbecue out of it and cooked 2 pigs. And all of us come. Von Dutch was there, and and then Ed broke down, and he showed up with the next president of the Hells Angels. He had to come to the party he wasn't going to come to. See? So it was just a wonderful, wonderful time. So the next year, Ed just took it over. The little spontaneous thing, he took it over, and that started the Rat Fink reunions. Pardon me. Now the first one, Suzanne did all the cooking and stuff except for the roasted pigs. So she brought them in foil-covered containers and stuff, and it was a wonderful thing. Everybody got drunk, fell down, have a Rat Fink reunion, like the old days. Well, Ed took it over the next year, and it got bigger, and it got bigger. It was still at Brucker's. And then we said, well, a lot of people are coming. We got to charge at the door. So started charging at the door, and it got way out of hand. So Ed had completely taken it over. Then he'd come up with auctions for the needy and all kind of stuff there. It is cleaned up and got sophisticated. And then it went to Kim's paint shop or somebody's paint shop, and then it went somewhere else. And Ed would let me sell my posters there. And after I sold my posters, I'd pull out $100 and slip it to him for his charity, And then it got bigger and bigger, and like more people wanted to sell stuff there. So I guess they just determined that $100 was what you're going to pay to sell stuff there. And then eventually these Japanese fellows from Moon Eyes, they made contract with Roth to buy him and all his going-ons, and they bought the Rat Fink thing, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it became a thing like it took up a whole racetrack, with drag racing and everything. So that's the origin of 1970 of the Rat Fink reunion. I think Street Rodder magazine covered it. If you can find that issue of Street Rodder, it shows the very first.
Oh, fun.
So at that very first one, Von Dutch come up and give me his own personal pocket knife, see? So it was a warm-hearted get-together. But it exploded, and Ed let his hair out a little bit and started really getting behind it. And he realized he had a functioning thing here now. And then it started being all over the country, and now I know they have one in Mantua, Utah, and the Moon Eye still has theirs, and but it all, the genesis was just a bunch of clowns sitting around eating on 2 pigs in a Datsun truck bed. But
of all that time spent at Roth's, what do you think's the best thing that came out of all that creativity? If you could put your finger on one thing. You have all the cars.
He almost alone made chopper motorcycles a part of the American scene, because that was fought against, and as he suffered, he lost his business over it. That killed him. That completely run him out of business. He lost his wife. He lost the property. He went into the state of depression where he joined the Mormons. He gave up completely and went to a school that taught you how to work on semis. He was going to be self-deprecating to the point that he was going to pay for his sins. So anyway, after that he got a job at Knott's Berry Farm, and then got out on his own again, but. Anyway.
But the choppers were a cultural shift and important thing that came out of Roth.
Well, this has always been a form of custom motorcycles way back in the 40s, but it only get to a certain point culturally and wouldn't be tolerated. And Ed come out with a magazine at his own expense, and no one would help him distribute it. No one would do a thing for it. At the same time, the Hells Angels were extorting money from him because of their name. It was just, the world was falling in on him, see? And he was, if he left any quality of tradition at all, it'd be those choppers. Then he got off on 3-wheelers. And when Ed got into something, the tide could not be turned. So anyway, but he was an enormously wonderful person. Charitable, kind, worried about your problems. He had a social skill, a very interesting characteristic. When people would come up to him and they were shy and they were trying to talk, he would help them by asking them a question he knew they knew, so that they had something on him. And it would just relax them. And I seemed to do it time after time. He'd ask them the most stupid question you knew they knew, and then they'd bolt up with the answer.
You know what? It's a great conversation.
Okay, Von Dutch. Von Dutch was what is the term? He hated mankind. He hated everybody. Von Dutch was my childhood hero. Till I met him. Me and him were very close friends for a while. And we'd stay up all night drinking beers over at my house and whatnot. He was a remarkable guy in the point that he could identify mechanical things that had been made and describe how they were made and how they were machined and the size of them. If he bought a motorcycle that was missing a casing, he could make that casing, see. And we'd had long drunken conversations about, well, how does a rotary engine on a World War I airplane work if it's turning, and how do you get gas to it, you know, and crazy questions like that. And he could answer all these questions. He knew, and pistols and guns, and he had an enormous, well-read history on things. But socially, you know, people told me, well, are you running around with Dutch now? I go, oh, we're good friends. But watch him, be careful. Oh, no, he's my friend. Watch him. And then they'd walk off. And he would do a psychopathic 180 that would horrify you. Later in his life, he was physically deteriorating, and Jim Brucker took him on and kept him alive for 10 years. And Von Dutch referred to him going nuts as goes Tasmanian. He'd go Tasmanian. He said, watch out when he goes. Von Dutch says, well, I might go Tasmanian. Brucker said, I've watched him go Tasmanian 100 times, and the last time was worse as the first time. It's the most horrifying experience. He would just get infuriated and blow up like a wild ape in a cage, and it threatened to kill you.
All the pent-up anger.
He would say the ugliest things to the wrong person at the wrong time, and he was so vile to women, so horrible to women. He would go into a biker bar, and he'd get up on the stand up on the bar and call them down for their biker costumes, and someone would jerk him down and beat his ass. And he'd get his ass beat about twice a year. Say, seriously. Brucker at his facility would rent out areas, and there was a Japanese dance, some Japanese function. And Von Dutch was walking around there, called them meatballs because of the red, calling these people meatballs at their dance. Brucker says the next thing he knows, here's Von Dutch crawling back to his trailer on all fours with the blood running out of his nose. That was a day in the life of Von Dutch.
Do you think that Von Dutch and Roth, I mean, they've been embraced, you know, as geniuses, and you know,
well, Roth overlooked Von Dutch.
Yeah.
He worshipped Von Dutch and styled himself after Von Dutch.
What are your thoughts on just how we look backward on Roth and Von Dutch right now? Because it just seems like they're very celebrated.
Roth was the most incredible person I ever met in my life. I could have lived without Von Dutch. Von Dutch had got it in his head that his philosophy was, if you could not contribute to the world, you should be executed. And the totalitarian situation he endorsed, of course he'd be the first to go. See? But he would mumble off in some German language that he didn't know, and he was really taken. He was a Nazophile, you know, he worshipped the Nazis. And when he was ailing, and when he was ailing it was bad, his stomach had ruptured open, and Brucker had to give him morphine shots every day, see? And he'd just sit around in his trailer with a wet rag on his intestines because they'd fall out. And he wouldn't put any clothes on, so if someone come to the gate, he'd go there naked, and people had said that he'd come to the gate and pee on them, you know. So Von Dutch wrote his last testimony to the human race, to mankind. And it was something like, I got a copy of it, I think everybody got a copy of it. What he did was he gave it to Jimmy, and Jimmy gave it to the Hells Angels. They were Xeroxed it, and they got to the world. I might not last long. I've been fighting this thing for a long time, but looking back, I'm kind of glad that I'm going, because we were fighting on the wrong side in World War II. I hate such and such race and such religion, on, and signed it Heil Hitler. See, okay, he signed this thing. Brucker lets the Hells Angels copy it. I get a copy. It gets out. These people start a clothing company after he dies. Okay, I'm waiting. I know that letter's out there, being copied and copied. 10 years go by before that hits the LA Times.
Really? Oh, wow.
And they print it verbatim. So there goes the clothing company. So they start calling the Channel 11 news calls and LA Times calls. No one would talk about Von Dutch. No one. So they ended up calling me. So I have to explain. This is one of the top heroes of my life, one of my greatest influences. But he had emotional problems that reveal themselves in rather dark forms. That he was very important and nurturing a form of art in America in the 50s that's translated over today as one of the most interesting forms of our culture. See? Covered for him. Hated him, had to cover for him, that's all. But
This is all great stuff. It's all part of this car culture.
Well, what I just told you is in my book, The Hot Rod World of Robert Williams. There's some really choice hot rod stories in there.
Yeah, I can't wait. It's tell me a little bit about the posters and the poster era.
We are saturated now in a period of nostalgia. But in 1971, 72, we weren't. When Jim Jacobs bought that Niekamp Roadster, his friends thought he was an idiot. Well, I remember the 50s really well, and they weren't candy coated. So I did a thing like this, and it got in Hot Rod magazine called the Tribute to Flatheads, say black and white. And it showed everyday life at a drive-in restaurant with a bunch of crude people talking about hot rods, you know, and showing a newspaper up about the police is going to do a crackdown, see. And it was bad welding on the cars, and you know, it was the kind of people I knew. Well, Hot Rod magazine paid me for that. They wanted a page, and then they turned it they paid me for a page and turned it sideways and got 2 pages out of it, so you had this thing. This was like 73. See? So they just hired a new editor that wanted to look back on the thing. He saw this thing, come to me as like kind of a demi-expert on this period. So I did that big thing for the Center Spread Hot Rod magazine of Devil with a Hammer, Hell with a Torch. Because I knew every damn tool, and I knew what you needed to lead, what percentage of lead and tin, and every little goddamn little thing that nobody, just a handful of people knew in that
What
magazine.
it takes to channel a car, the ultimate transformation.
Yeah, I understood all that stuff. Yeah,
Right.
so it was all in there. Now, I did that for that picture, you know, and I did that for a very small audience that go, whoa, not for everybody that's got a '55 Chevrolet. See, so that went over big with them, and they said, we want one of those every month. So, how can I do that? It took 5 weeks to do this one. So anyway, I just started, I just started doing them. And Bob Larrabee just was really happy with them. And I got to put my little twist on them,
Yeah.
you know.
You see that.
But when it got to the pressure point that there was a bunch of cars I really didn't care for and things, it just, let Darryl do it, you know, let these other people do it. That's their bread and butter, that's their life, you know.
Right.
I mean, I'm
Not a lot of social commentary in the.
I'm not that big on tea buckets. You know, I had a couple, but you know.
I thought your Tri-5 Chevy one was pretty awesome. Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, that was
cool.
at gunpoint.
Yeah. I wondered about that.
But that.
The 32, the one.
Yeah.
with the
Oh, I
32s,
love that
that's
one.
killer,
You know,
yeah.
but I'm not a commercial artist.
No,
you know,
for sure.
I can't turn those things out all the time, and I'm not a crowd pleaser. I've always had the ambition to develop an audience of my own that flowers into a bigger audience, you know, an arcane audience that's strong enough to keep me alive and maybe get bigger, you know, and it'll lap over into something else. Because fighting the big audience of finances and whatnot, I can't handle that.
Yeah. Do you think art can change the world?
Can change the world?
Yeah.
It's a reflection of the world. It doesn't change the world, it's a reflection of it.
Yeah.
Psychedelic art and the psychedelic influences was the first time art could really enjoy worrying about what the artist wanted to do and creating it on its own audience and not being responsible to the mores of everybody around it.
Yeah. Did you draw a lot as a kid?
Yeah, I was always drawing, always. My parents would sit me down on a big roll of butcher paper, and I'd get a red crayon, and I'd do a skeleton in red, bone for bone for bone, and call it Red Skeleton. And then the song is popular in 1948 or 49, Devil in My Darling's Eye, and I'd do a big eye with a devil in the eye. You know, little baby, you know.
I've been looking at your ring this whole time. Tell me about your ring. That
ring was made by a jeweler named Axel Stocks in New York that did jewelry for Salvador Dali.
Really?
Yeah. And he did jewelry for rock stars, famous rock stars. And he did a whole bunch of jewelry for me and Suzanne. I think Suzanne might have some of it on now. He was a remarkable person, a real crazy person. And he just give us jewelry, you know, and
Cool.
he's a story unto itself, you know, but.
This is just an amazing chance to sit down and learn a lot of history, learn about an artist that I know I admire, and hear everyone at the museum admires an awful lot. So I can't thank you enough, and so glad to be your friend. And if there's anything we can ever do to help you, we just love
you guys
telling your story.
you guys have treated me so royal and so kind. You know, I'd sit here and tell you about Christmas decorations in 1948. You know.
Well, thanks for making primer cars
Okay.
cool, because
Okay.
that makes me fit right in.
Okay.